Howdy folks, I'm Axiom, as you might know from the YouTube channel, or if you're watching this in class, because, surprise, this is a class assignment, and it's going to be shown to you people. Hi. You might not know, I run Axiom History here, and this is all a huge ploy just to get views on my YouTube channel. Haha, just kidding. Anyways, welcome back to it's 9:30 at night, and I'm literally losing my mind because this has to be done by tomorrow. Anywho, today we're learning about the Berlin Conference, or European colonies in Africa. So, get ready for this wild ride of information.
Let's get scratching.
So, let's start off with what the Berlin Conference was about. France, Germany, Spain, Italy, and Portugal were all in it. It sought to discuss the partitioning of Africa, establishing rules to amicably divide resources among the Western countries at the expense of the African people. When did it happen? It started November 15th, 1884, and lasted until February 26th, 1885. So, roughly a year or so. And why? It was to set up international guidelines for making claims to African land to avoid conflict between European powers. And where did it happen? Berlin, Germany. The Berlin Conference. In 1884, European powers had an international conference in Berlin regarding Africa. The conference declared that European powers can not claim any part of Africa unless it had set up a government office there. The next 20 years after the conference, European powers had almost partitioned the entire continent. So, before European imperialism, there were hundreds of different languages, with varied governments pertaining to different ethnic groups. The map is on the left. European colonization, the map on the right, ignored these ethnic borders. The dark gray areas on the left map represent all the displaced and split ethnic groups. Hey, sorry for the different audio. I'm now recording in my school because I didn't have enough time. So, Africa before imperialism. North Africa. Fertile land along the Mediterranean and Sahara Desert. It was under Muslim rule for centuries, and it was still ruled by the Ottoman Empire in the early 1800s. Islamic conquest in West Africa. I'm going to try to pronounce this name because I'm going to mess it up so bad, but they had denounced the corruption of Loka Hasua rulers and called for social and religious reforms to purify and revive Islam. This person ruled Sokoto Caliphate. His success inspired other Muslim reform movements in West Africa. And the Asante Kingdom had emerged. In East Africa, port cities, Mombasa and Kilwa, suffered from Portuguese rule. Slaves, ivory, and gold were shipped to the Middle East, in southern Africa. Zulu wars devastated the Zulu people, who then migrated to southern Africa in the 1500s, with a ruthless leader, Shaka. Shaka drove Zulus back north, and well-armed Boers arrived, who were descendants of Dutch farmers. They resented British laws such as the abolishment of slavery. The Boers and Zulus fought. Europeans had kidnapped Africans as slaves, and they were forced to do miserable labor in plantations and mines. In the 1800s, European nations slowly outlawed the slave trade. However, it took years for the slaves to actually be freed. Abolitionists in Britain and the United States promoted the idea of returning freed slaves in the Americas to Africa, even if they were born in America. Sierra Leone was created for former slaves to settle, and some settled in Liberia. Although slavery was outlawed, slave trade continued in Africa. European contact increases. From the 1400s to the 1700s, Europeans traded with Africans but knew little about the continent due to disease and difficult geography. Explorers pushed into Africa's interior. In the early 1800s, European explorers began pushing into the interior of Africa. Missionaries follow explorers. Catholic and Protestant missionaries sought to convert Africans to Christianity, and they degraded the Africans and saw them as children in need of education and rescue. Livingstone's exploration. David Livingstone explored Africa for 30 years, relentlessly opposed the slave trade, and quote-unquote discovered the waterfalls on the Zambezi River named Victoria Falls. King Leopold II of Belgium hired Henry Stanley to arrange treaties with African leaders. It set off Europe's colonization of Africa and the Congo, and virtually all of Africa was controlled by the powers of Europe. European colonization. Leopold's horrific acts in the Congo. Villagers were tortured and forced to do slave labor, and those who refused were savagely beaten and mutilated. France expands its colonization. It conquered Algeria in the north and territories in western and central Africa. British colonization of Africa. It had included heavily populated regions like Egypt and southern Africa. The Boer War. In late 1800s, the discovery of gold and diamonds in the Cape Colony led to a conflict between British and Dutch settlers, the Boers. Other nations were involved, like Portugal, Angola and Mozambique, Italy, Libya and the Horn of Africa, and Germany, Namibia, Tanzania, Cameroon, and Togo. The African Resistance. Samori Toure, probably said that wrong, I'm sorry, but they were a group of Africans that fought French forces. Some women leaders of the resistance. The first one is the Queen of the Asante, who led the fight against the British in the last Asante War, and the second is a spiritual leader of the Shona people from Zimbabwe, who encouraged her people to resist British rule. Ethiopia remains independent, there's resistance against Germany, there's new African elite. Ethiopia remains independent. Ethiopia had successfully resisted European colonization and remained independent. Menelik II, the reforming ruler of Ethiopia in the late 1800s, hired European experts to plan modern roads and bridges and set up a Western school system. He imported the latest weapons of European officers to help train his army. Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1896, but Menelik had prepared his country. The battle down, the Ethiopians dominated the Italian invaders. Resistance against Germany. In East Africa, the Germans fought wide-ranging wars against African groups resisting foreign rule. The Germans gained much of their control by using terror. Any parties that resisted were killed, driven off the land, or turned into forced laborers for settlers. In 1905, how is that pronounced? Whatever, the war began and the Germans triumphed after only burning acres of farmland, leaving thousands of locals to die of starvation. With limited African resistance, slave trading, and an outbreak in Rinderpest. And finally, we have the new African elite. During the age of imperialism, a Western-educated African elite emerged in both Africa and other parts of the world. Middle-class Africans rejected their culture and admired Western ways of life. By the early 1900s, African leaders were forging nationalist movements to pursue self-determination and independence. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video on the European colonies in Africa and the Berlin Conference. It's been quite the hassle to make in 2 days, but I'll show everyone who made it here. Huge thanks to them and my group. And yeah, and if you're at school watching this, don't try to find my channel.